Great. Thank you, Jason, and welcome everybody. As Jason said, I'm Steve Kaplan, Vice President of Customer Success Finance at Nutanix, though better known on Twitter as ROI Dude. Over the years, I've been very fortunate to co-author, along with senior technical architects, 5 books on Citrix and 3 on VMware. I wrote the business parts. My co-authors all told me I wrote the easy parts. Well, in 2019, I came out with my first solo book, The ROI Story, A Guide for IT Leaders. Mark Templeton, the longtime CEO of Citrix, graciously wrote the foreword. And the book is geared toward helping IT professionals utilize a financial analysis framework, not only for evaluating disruptive technologies, but for the ones that make sense, then how to build a business case around the technology in order to get the funding to actually deploy it. Now, Jason, let's go ahead and go to polling question number 1.
Yes, I should have mentioned, folks, there are going to be some polls here, so please participate in these polls. This is obviously our virtual way of people putting their hand up in the room so you can see it all. So that first poll question comes to you is all around funds for security. When you need funds for a security initiative, what do you require? And I appreciate if you are not the senior most security executive in your organization, please vote on behalf of your organization. When you need funds for security initiative, what do you require? Nothing, my request is good enough. A detailed internal ROI or TCO analysis, an external or externally vetted financial analysis, or finance never approves our IT projects. Only 18 of 48 votes so far, keep them coming. 24 voted, we're at 50% now, keep them going. We'll leave this up for another 10 seconds. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And there are the results there, Steve.
Great, so 85% said a detailed ROI or TCO analysis, which is great. Over a period of 20 years, I started, ran, and ultimately sold to award-winning channel partner businesses. The first was focused on Citrix, the second on VMware. And rather than use conventional sales methodologies, we would use ROI TCO to help our customers evaluate disruptive technologies like Citrix, like VMware. I considered Cisco UCS to be disruptive back in the day. In fact, what you're looking at is the fall 2012 edition of Cisco's magazine. The cover story, Getting Real with ROI, was about the financial analysis work I did for Concentra Healthcare, headquartered in Dallas. And that's me in the middle of the picture speaking with Concentra's very savvy CIO, Suzanne Kosu. And Suzanne has said to me, Steve, for years we've been trying to get the monies we need to expand our small virtualization environment. The most we've been able to get is $15,000 to $20,000 at a time, not enough to even make a dent. I worked with Suzanne's staff to put together a comprehensive ROI analysis that I thought had excellent results, enough to capture any CFO's attention. But Suzanne said to me, Steve, we're owned by a private equity company with extremely stringent financial controls. We need more. When Suzanne and I presented the results to the senior management, a couple of the board members, of course we went over the numbers. But per Suzanne's guidance, what we emphasized was that Concentra, this large national healthcare company, was running on a single backup generator, and that the air conditioning was a total mess. It needed a $1 million overhaul. But with the hot Dallas summer months approaching and an ever-increasing demand for more servers, there was still a good likelihood that they'd suffer from downtime, which would have been horrible. And if Suzanne were here, I think she'd tell you something like, that was an amazing meeting. After years of struggling to get monies in drips and drabs, we essentially got the buy-off on the spot for the millions of dollars we needed to virtualize our entire data center. Shortly after selling my second company, I moved up to Lake Tahoe, where I envisioned this nice, cushy consulting career. And just after moving up, I get a call from a friend of VMware VCDX. Hey, Steve, I joined this hot startup in the infrastructure space. I think you'd be a good fit. Come interview. I wasn't looking to go to work for anybody. I just moved up to Tahoe. But I met with the startup, and I was extremely impressed with the people. And I was blown away when they showed me their technology. They had taken the same type of web scale architecture pioneered by Google and now used by all the leading cloud providers, and they brought it to the enterprise, allowing organizations to jettison their SANs and instead run all their applications on a distributed file system running on commodity servers, aggregating the local storage, the flash, and the disk of the servers. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, if this works as projected, this would change the entire IT industry as we know it. But then I quickly started second guessing myself. How often does a 50-person, tiny little startup have even a prayer against the literal handful of multi-billion-dollar giants that have completely dominated not only the data center for years, but as I knew full too well, the entire reseller channel? So I didn't join, but as I watched Nutanix's explosive growth over the next year, I became convinced that they had a real shot at pulling off one of the business upsets of the decade, and I knew I had to be a part of that. So I gave up my dreams of a cushy consultant career, went back to work 70 hours a week at a startup. And that was 8 years ago as of March 18th, last week. But it's been this extraordinary opportunity to participate as Nutanix unquestionably has changed the industry. The technology pioneered became known as hyper-converged infrastructure, or HCI for short, and is certainly now mainstream standard. IDC says that HCI revenues were $8.4 billion last year and projects them at $30 billion in 2024. And Nutanix over 4 years ago went public and joined the billion-dollar ranks itself. When I started at Nutanix, this was our marketing, ban the SAN. And back then, every leading data center manufacturer scoffed at this notion of running serious or enterprise apps on software and commodity servers instead of on their big proprietary SANs. But how things have changed 8 years later. Now, almost every data center manufacturer out there, all the leading ones, they all offer one or more HCI solutions. Industry analysts are catching up as well. A December 2020 article in SiliconANGLE states, the days of selling storage controllers that mask the deficiencies of spinning disk or add embedded hardware functions, those days are gone. Even VMware, which is 85% owned by Dell EMC, tweeted in January of this year, it's nearly impossible to satisfy real-time business needs with traditional three-tier infrastructure. Just last week, United Network Organ Sharing, or UNOS, testified to the robustness of Nutanix HCI. Taiwan Nicholson, director of IT operations, said, when you have a multi-tiered environment consisting of storage, compute, and networking, it's hard to aggregate and understand performance and functionality. I've literally seen jaws drop at the speed Nutanix brings to applications that were traditionally very resource intensive. We are seeing a 30% improvement on some very laborious big data, deep analytics workloads. Nutanix shaved almost half the time from an analytics task that used to take numerous hours to complete. After starting at Nutanix, I was fascinated to learn about the company's security roots. Back when Nutanix had only 60 employees, their first customer, the US government, came to them and said, hey, if you want to run in production on the DoD networks, you got to get all these certifications. So this 60-person startup was faced with this quandary. Do we follow the path of almost every other startup in the IT industry and grow first and get more customers and more funding and then kind of bolt security back on? Or do we make this massive investment in retooling and labs and consultants? And they decided to go for it. And in the process, really bake security into Nutanix DNA. They also realized that they could automate these hardening guides that often ran for multiple pages. That would save a lot of time, a lot of money, and would also eliminate the human error mistakes that come from doing manual hardening. Next, Nutanix realized that they could automate the baseline to run at frequent intervals so that if, for example, someone changed the root password or modified the SSH configs, the system detects it and then restores itself back to the security baseline version. Eric Shepard, Research Vice President of IDC, told VentureBeat magazine last March that hyperconverged systems are becoming the backbone of the multi-cloud world. Well, this is certainly true for Nutanix, whose built-in HCI security features and functions serve to lower the complexity as the foundation for both private clouds and for multi-clouds. A December 15, 2020 Gartner survey found that 90% of human resources leaders will allow employees to work remotely, at least part-time, even after the pandemic subsides. But work from anywhere poses a raft of new security issues since organizations are essentially extending their networks into someone's home, enabling an infected device to potentially infect the entire corporate network. IT also loses the network traffic visibility for remote users. Both VDI and desktop as a service solutions mitigate these issues, eliminate the need for VPNs, and give users a fresh desktop every time they log in, at least if you set it up that way. And HCI really changed the entire VDI game, making it dramatically easier because now organizations can start with a small number of users like a pilot or a beta, and then grow as quickly or as slowly as they want, maintaining perfect linearity in terms of performance and user experience, whether they're 30 users or 300 users or 30,000 users. And unlike a SAN, they never have to go through this painful upgrade process or start hitting inconsistent user performance as their storage controllers reach capacity. And when we actually do an ROI analysis like the one you're seeing that we did for a healthcare organization in the Midwest, we often would do it in conjunction with the refresh rate. For example, this organization had a 5-year PC/laptop refresh rate. So if we modeled it out that each year when roughly 20% of their users come up for refresh, instead of buying them a new PC or laptop, we just lock down their desktop to look like a thin client, give them a virtual desktop, and then all new users would just get a zero client automatically. And so when approaching it this way, it showed 5-year savings of $2.4 million and a 10.2-month payback. And again, this is very typical when converting to VDI on Nutanix, that often just the cost, in fact, almost always just the cost of the PC and laptop refresh will pay for the entire VDI project, the hardware, the software, the partner services to set it up. And these were the numbers that we presented to senior management, but like with Concentra, we also went over other aspects. Security, they were having trouble keeping up with patches in the physical desktop world that could lead to security breaches, which could be potentially millions of dollars of fines. Revenues, by going to VDI, the average physician was able to save enough time to see 1 extra patient a day. Well, you multiply that revenue per patient by all the physicians, by all the days over the 5-year analysis period, and that came to 120 million in projected increased revenues on top of the 2.4 million in infrastructure savings and potentially millions in fines avoided. So you can see how this made an extremely compelling ROI. Nutanix recently issued its 3rd annual Enterprise Cloud Index, or ECI. This is a report compiled by the research organization Vance and Bourne, who surveyed 3,400 IT decision makers from across the globe. And they found that 86% of the respondents said that a hybrid cloud is their ideal operating model. Also, 76% reported that the pandemic has caused IT to be viewed more strategically within their organizations. This is something, obviously, that CIOs have long sought. Unfortunately, though, this is not likely the case for all the organizations that still run traditional SAN-based data centers. In my book, I make the case that the legacy data center model, the SAN-based data center model, is broken. And I give a lot of examples to support this assertion. This is my favorite. This is a tweet by Mustafa Kali, who authored the book, Storage Design and Implementation in vSphere 6. And he bragged on Twitter they fit all 1,242 pages in one volume. I mean, 1,242 pages. This is a big, thick, heavy book. Pre-pandemic, when I used to travel, I would sometimes lug it along as a prop. It would take up over 1/4 of my suitcase. One time, a TSA agent searched my suitcase because he didn't believe me when I told him that big object that showed up in the X-ray was a book. Now, in contrast, the Nutanix equivalent to storage design and implementation in vSphere, because even though Nutanix has its own hypervisor, AHV, that ships with all our software, it's still half our customers, 48%, still run VMware. So the delta, the equivalent, is this 22-page tech note, and the 1,220-page delta between the two represents all the complexity of SAN-based architecture. And of course, where you have complexity, you have a lot more cost. You're managing more pieces, you're requiring more effort, you need specialized skill sets in administrating both SANs and storage network. And moving parts also means less reliability and more security vulnerability. And when roughly 70% of legacy IT's budget is spent just keeping lights on, it doesn't leave many resources for even responding quickly to the business needs, let alone driving digital transformation. And without the trust and support of the business, IT is typically relegated to the role of order taker rather than innovation center. Key for nearly all mid-market organizations is both automation and innovation. But how do you know which technology to deploy, if any? Well, I found over the years that an informal financial analysis process often just won't cut it for different reasons. One of those being personal agenda. For example, maybe somebody's getting to retire in 2 or 3 years, an administrator, and he doesn't want to be bothered to learn a new technology and figure out how to deploy it. Or maybe somebody else has years of relationship she's established with her legacy vendors that she highly values. Or perhaps someone else has built her career around legacy certifications she's achieved. She doesn't want to see these go away. So when you have these types of personal agenda, it can make it challenging to get unbiased results to the decision makers. And I certainly consider this to be a vast minority of cases that most IT professionals are genuinely curious about new technology. They want to learn about it. If it makes sense, they want to bring it into the organization, even if it's at their own discomfort. But even in these cases, they're subject to what we call confirmation bias. As an analogy, imagine we could go back in time 30 years where we see a would-be taxi passenger standing miserable in the rain, fruitlessly trying to hail a cab. And we go up to her and we say, hey, in 30 years, there's going to be these new technologies, the internet and GPS and smartphones and rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft that will transform your transportation experience into something that's simple and predictable and even pleasant. Well, she would probably lack the context to really understand what it is we're talking about. I found the same type of thing over my many years of doing this when it comes to evaluating disruptive technologies, especially the financial nuances of those technologies. People tend to look at them through the status quo lens of what they know. As just one example, at Nutanix, we commonly get asked, what is your cost per gigabyte or per terabyte? Now, that's a great metric if you're going to buy storage. If for whatever reason, I don't know why you would today, but if for whatever reason you're going to buy a new SAN or new NAS, but it makes absolutely no sense in a hyperconverged world. Or take the whole virtualization lifecycle. When I started my VMware consultancy in early 2005, VMware was already mainstream. It was across the world. vMotion had been out for well over a year. Biggest objection we would get from IT professionals: you will never put my production server into a virtual machine. Now we laugh about that today, right? And yet Gartner, who's in the business of projecting IT trends, saw what was happening with this transformation of virtualization in the public cloud space. And years ago, in fact, 4 years ago, last week, they retired their Magic Quadrant for virtualization. And today, every leading public cloud provider, as well as Nutanix, a leading private cloud / hybrid cloud manufacturer, we all support legacy commercial hypervisors. But for our own customers, we all offer Linux-based hypervisors that are natively integrated into our software-defined stacks. In fact, all but Azure are KVM-based. And this is just so much simpler. There's no separate management tier. You have to buy and configure and set up and figure out how to make redundant, figure out how to secure, and figure out how to scale. There's no certifications required, at least nothing remotely close to legacy hypervisors. They're resilient, they're scalable, they're just there. So we can use a formal financial analysis framework to help mitigate status quo bias, mitigate confirmation bias, so that the decision makers can make the best choice for their organizations, whatever that happens to be. 2 weeks ago, Enterprise Networking Planet ran an article on the best server virtualization software of 2021. And the article it covers about 9 different products, but they include a glowing review of Nutanix HV, saying that it does away with a model that views virtualization as a complex layer of the IT stack that is licensed, deployed, and managed separately. And under key differentiators for AHV, the article lists smooth implementation of security, network micro-segmentation, as well as built-in configuration, audit, and remediation. Jason, let's go to poll number 2.
Okie dokie, folks. So here is your second poll of the session. How virtualized is your organization? How virtualized is your organization? 3 pretty straightforward answers for you to choose between there. So let's get these votes in. Ticking up nicely. I'll have this run for another 10 seconds, folks. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Some last second voting in there. And there are your results, Steve.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised. Only 27% are 100% virtualized, 53%, 80 to 100%, and 20% got a long way to go. I found that the organizations that still have physical servers, in most cases, these tend to be the more difficult ones to virtualize, the big database servers and so on. And many times IT, maybe they don't have the SAN space they need, or the IT staff is just too busy. Well, Nutanix changes all that, because you don't need a SAN, you don't need a storage fabric, you don't need a storage administrator, you don't need virtualization software, you don't need a virtualization administrator. Just P2V and go, and start saving massive amounts of money and other benefits. Tony Vargas, CIO of Adventist Risk Management, said, "We are a small business, but we're running an enterprise-sized IT environment. It's very difficult to run that large of an environment unless you employ separate experts for your storage, hypervisor, and networking infrastructure. The simplicity of the Nutanix architecture eliminated the need to hire and train multiple IT specialists. It brought our enterprise environment to the level that our small IT professionals could easily manage." Like Adventist Risk, and like so many other Nutanix customers, Mercedes-Benz in Brazil is another example where they essentially, quote, hyper-converged their IT staff. Annabelle Corral, IT infrastructure architect, said, "With Nutanix, I don't need those separate teams. One person can operate the whole environment on their own. The operation is easy and the interface is very user-friendly, so one team member can handle a cluster with 3 nodes or 100 nodes without much effort." Mercedes uses Nutanix HV like half our customers, along with the Nutanix products Calm and Carbon, not only to boost IT efficiency, but also to slash data center space and cost. Nutanix enables organizations to simplify their operations, letting IT focus on what's important, innovation and delivering enhanced business outcomes. For example, Asaya Nathaniel, CIO of Delaware Valley Community Health, said, "Before Nutanix, we were averaging 171-second login time. After migrating our databases to Nutanix, it now takes us less than 19 seconds to access an EMR, that's electronic medical something, application, EMR application, residence, I guess. Our staff can meet or exceed their workload expectations and see more patients per day. Nutanix was the best choice I made as CIO. And when the pandemic hit, the versatility of Delaware Valley's HCI enabled them to shift 75% of their workforce to remote work capabilities in just a matter of days." Prior to implementing Nutanix, the city of Berkeley had traditional 3-tier infrastructure, was difficult to scale and unreliable. It was complex to troubleshoot, sometimes resulting in long-lasting outages during which the city departments had to go back to pen and paper. Savita Chowdhury, director of IT, City of Berkeley, said, "With Nutanix, we have been able to adapt during these unprecedented times while continuing to provide the highest level of service to our community." Dominic Maidment, technology architect at Total Gas and Power, said, "We're going through a digital transformation program, but the one thing holding us back has been our 3-tier data center architecture with the SAN that's creaking at the seams. It's just too complex and difficult to manage." Total has been using Nutanix not only for its entire HCI platform, but also for unified visibility into public and private cloud spending to simplify compliance, security, and cost management across its cloud borders. Public cloud, of course, has this tremendous momentum. AWS alone is on a $50 billion run rate. Well, you combine this momentum with the deep frustration of legacy SAN-based infrastructure, the complexity, the inflexibility, and the high cost, and you get this pressure for organizations of all sizes to lift and shift to public cloud. During conversations with organizations, they'll often tell me, many times proudly, "We have a cloud-first policy." Well, as an analyst, I like to take a step back and examine people's strategic decisions. So my response to everyone making this leap is simply why? What type of research and analysis went into this choice? And I've heard responses ranging from the CIO told us to do it, to the board thinks it'd be a good idea, to my personal favorite, we want to save money. Rarely are these reasonings backed by data or critical thinking about the most cloud smart choice for the business. And it turns out that public cloud is expensive, at least for predictable workloads, which just so happen to make up the majority of workloads for most organizations. It's the old rent versus buy analogy. If you're going to use a car just a few weeks out of the year, absolutely rent it. If you're going to use it all the time, it's going to be way more economical to buy it. We've done hundreds of analyses with public cloud. It's exactly the same thing. If you have a elastic workload, an unpredictable workload, a burstable workload, put it in public cloud, run it much more economically. If it's predictable, though, put it on a world-class HCI infrastructure like Nutanix, and you're going to run it much less expensively there. The Flexera 2020 State of the Cloud report says that 82% of organizations struggle with managing cloud spend and are over budget by an average of 23%. This is supported by the November 2020 McKinsey report that states 80% of enterprises consider managing cloud spend a challenge. The IDG State of IT Modernization 2020 report you're looking at says that 7 in 10 organizations have experienced higher than expected cloud costs. And in addition to the difficulty of managing cloud spend, public cloud native has these many other challenges as well. You're sharing your infrastructure with other customers. You can get performance issues, noisy neighbor problems. All the leading public cloud providers have had outages. Azure had a 14-hour outage last Monday. Trying to compensate for these by spanning multiple zones is typically very expensive. Public cloud is complex, separate policies, IT governance, separate tool sets, invoices that can run for dozens of pages. What do you do if your public cloud provider raises their cost, or they start to compete with you, or they miss their security SLAs? Because you're writing to their APIs, you're using their tool sets. Very expensive, difficult, and time-consuming to shift to another provider. As of January 2019, you can no longer capitalize your public cloud contract costs. You have to expense them. Pretty mundane issue, but perhaps not to your CFO. Organizations tend to dramatically underestimate the cost and time of migrating to public cloud, while dramatically overestimating the viability of actually moving all their workloads there. Something not many mid-sized or large organizations accomplish. And even if it is possible, it's likely to take years. And until that last workload leaves your on-premises data center, you're paying for both environments, the high-rent public cloud and the on-prem environment, and the IT staff to manage both the cloud native and the private cloud. The IDG report that I mentioned also says that 49% of organizations in public cloud are struggling with managing security. Now, of course, the leading cloud providers invest heavily in their security, but they're not responsible for your own internal policies and processes. And these inevitably differ greatly on on-premises versus public cloud native. In fact, anytime you have to do something manual on either the private or public side is a disaster waiting to happen. Public cloud also has a much broader attack vector where simple mistakes can sometimes be catastrophic. Capital One's 100 million record breach, $80 million fine, for example, all stemmed from a misconfigured server. I wrote an article for Forbes last year about using a formal financial analysis process, not only to help mitigate status quo, but also to alleviate this pressure to lift and shift to public cloud, and instead gather the data to start designing an optimal cloud smart strategy. Cloud smart is simply putting the right workload on the right cloud, whether on-premises, private, public, or multi-clouds. Tiwan Nicholson of Unos, who I mentioned earlier, said, it becomes about finding a balance between being on-prem and in the cloud. Nutanix gives us the best of both worlds. We have that cloud-like scalability, manageability, and flexibility on-prem, but we can convert to cloud for workloads when necessary. The foundation of Nutanix's hybrid cloud strategy is Nutanix clusters, which is Nutanix AOS or OS ported to public cloud running on bare metals. Because clusters lets you operate the same way in your on-prem environment as in public cloud, it mitigates these concerns, like from a third of ECI response, over a third, said about being short on skills needed to manage a mixed private and public cloud environments. Nutanix clusters let you use the same tool sets, skill sets, operating models, IT governance, and even the same security policies for both on-prem and public cloud. And as a really nice bonus, for almost all workloads, Nutanix actually lowers the cost of public cloud native. It also lets you migrate much, much faster to public cloud. This is an analysis we did for a customer county showing them 5 different scenarios. On the far left was running their 3-tier on-prem environment. The far right was running Nutanix clusters in public cloud. And as you can see, the clusters is a little bit more expensive than the 3-tier environment for this example. In many cases, it'll be less. It was a lot more than the on-prem Nutanix, but it was millions less than the public cloud native. And that's not even including the typically huge cost of application factoring and replatforming. And in this analysis, by the way, we didn't segment predictable from unpredictable workloads. We just mixed them all together. Nutanix's award-winning CIO advises relax about the technology, focus on the business. I couldn't agree more. I run a team of financial analysts who work with customers across the globe to help evaluate their environments and their decision-making, and of course, Nutanix technologies, 3-tier technologies, all types of different cloud technologies. Whenever possible, we strive to uncover the business objectives and then map those back to the IT initiatives, and then ultimately back to the disruptive technology. Jason, let's go to our final polling question, please.
Okay, final polling question, folks. How aligned is IT with the business? This question that comes up time and time and time and time again. We work in lockstep all the time. We interact. We're still waiting to get introduced to the business. Let's run for another 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okie doke.
Well, I'm glad to see that nobody is waiting to get introduced to the business. We actually find for the larger organizations, there's almost always people saying this is the case. And in my channel partner days, we had instances where we would have to introduce the two. Yesterday, we had a VP offsite meeting with Rajiv Ramaswamy going over his first 100 days as Nutanix's new CEO. And I was surprised to hear him emphasize how mid-market companies typically view Nutanix as much more of a partner than a vendor. And this is certainly true with my own experience. From my perspective derived from 20 years as a channel partner and then 8 more years working Nutanix, I completely agree for many reasons. And there's different validations of this. One of these is Nutanix's extraordinary net promoter score. Nutanix easily leads the industry with a remarkable net promoter score of over 90 the last 7 years in a row. And as you can see, it's not just IT industry leaders, many very well-known brands, Nutanix is still leading. My team and I, we also try to maintain this Nutanix partnership. For example, we do something that I don't know of any other manufacturer that does. We will go back to a customer who's been running Nutanix for 18 months, 3 years, 5 years. We call this a look back analysis, and we'll help them quantify. Okay, how much have you actually saved with Nutanix in terms of hardware, software, OpEx? How's it impacted your IT staff life and IT churn now that they no longer have to work nights and weekends doing upgrades? How's it impacted your business? So I certainly look forward to working with you and my team as well, not just as a vendor, but as a partner. And Jason, with that, let's go ahead, please, and open it up to Q&A.
Give me 2 seconds, and here I am. I'm back in the room. Hello, everybody. All right. Well, let me stop sharing. Actually, Steve, have you got a final slide with just your Twitter handle? I know I've seen the ROI guy, right? Yeah, all good. Well, it's all good. Well, let's jump into the Q&A. I do apologize, folks. That's because I rambled on a little bit too much at the beginning, but we do have good 10 minutes left for Q&A, so we can jump into that here. So first and foremost, some great comments coming in the chat as well. It seems like there's a couple of Nutanix customers in the audience here who have been singing your praises here, Steve. So that's fantastic to see. But question coming in, this one from Dan Sproul. I may have a very small use case, but want to ensure I understand the security certifications. I have a new need to manage a small amount of CUI, confidential unclassified information, and believe I can leverage this service to manage cloud-based storage separate and distinct from the rest of my network. So 2 questions. Any way to easily determine ROI and share it? And would Nutanix suggest using the system in this manner?
Well, Dan, you've tapped my security knowledge. In terms of an ROI, I would look at the before environment and then the cost to implement that security posture, and then what the return is. So that's pretty easy. In terms of Nutanix's recommendation, we're going to recommend, at least my team is going to recommend, at least looking at clusters, because again, you get all the same security across both environments, same operating model, all these other benefits. You migrate much faster, and even including the cost of clusters, you're reducing your public cloud native costs. So to me, it's just as much of a no-brainer as anything in IT.
Good stuff. Thank you. And we had a comment here. It came in from someone just saying, "I never trust on-prem versus cloud cost comparisons." I want to get your thoughts on that. Is that something you commonly see, and how can people, I suppose, dispel that mistrust and use those comparisons to better use?
I would say I never trust non-comparisons, which is so often the case. People, I was working with a very, very large organization who they say, told me, "We want to go to public cloud." And I said, "Why?" And so, "We want to save money." So really, can I see your analysis? And of course, there's no analysis because you're not going to save money going to public cloud. In my book, chapter 8, I give a large detailed section of 10 recommended steps to doing TCO for public cloud and kind of really diving in. And then it's just a question of doing what is your on-prem. And absolutely, if you're meaning, ignoring the data center costs and rack space, power, cooling, so on, then I agree with you. But at least my team, we're very careful to include all those costs, staffing cost, delta. We want to look at all the different variables that affect both environments and then do the analysis. And we find that typically, even without looking at clusters, Nutanix on-prem is going to be usually a fourth to a third of the cost of public cloud. Sometimes, with big, long reserve instances and so on, maybe it'll be half the cost. But, and again, for predictable workloads, we're almost always going to be much less expensive.
Great, thank you. When doing a financial analysis, what happens if you don't know the cost of your legacy equipment?
Professor Deepak Malhotra, who's written many books on negotiation, he's actually considered maybe the world's foremost expert in negotiation, is Nutanix advisor for many years, and I've gotten the opportunity to hear him speak and read his books, and I kind of adopted one of his negotiation techniques. The challenge is you want the financial analysis to conclude, and if you, in almost all organizations, if you try and get every single piece of data you need, it's just going to go on forever. And so what we'll do is we'll use a placeholder. Maybe somebody's looking at refreshing their SAN, for example, and we'll tell them, we see for this type of SAN, costs usually range between 700,000 and $1 million. And you're a pretty heavy user. So is it okay if we use a placeholder of $800,000? And then as we go forward, if more information becomes available, it's just a few mouse clicks, go back and change the price. So using this technology, we find to be extremely effective and actually get the analyses done so you can come to a conclusion.
Thank you very much. How do you feel DevOps or automated pipelines tie into this strategy?
Well, Nutanix's DevOps solution is called Calm. It does a lot of automation. It's building up tremendous momentum. I just saw a nice win alert today about it. And we have a tool that helps do a TCO analysis for Calm. It's going to be maybe a little bit, we're looking at administrative savings more than some of the other, just basic HCI type of analyses, or even Nutanix Era, our database product. But very effective, very powerful. I absolutely strongly encourage DevOps and automation and taking a look at Calm if you're a Nutanix customer.
Great. Somebody else just asked about the book. Can you just confirm the title of your book? Another attendee did kind of mention the title, but I just wanted you to confirm the title of your book that you authored, please.
The one that I assume you're talking about is the ROI book, the ROI Story, a guide for IT leaders. You can buy it for $10 on Amazon, but just Google it in Nutanix and you can download it for free from our website. Or maybe Jason's going to send you a link, I don't know.
There you go, folks. Nice and easy. And then final question, just as we end things off here, just for the benefit of everybody watching, what is the story behind ROI Dude?
Well, ROI Dude is my Twitter handle. I don't know how I ever came up with that many years ago when I joined Twitter. But kind of funny, when I wrote the book, if you get a copy of it, and by the way, I'm also happy to bring physical copies once we can all travel. Hopefully that day is coming soon. But anyway, I've always loved cartoons, and I created a comic book character, ROI Dude, who's my even geekier alter ego. If you see him, he's in socks and sandals and stuff. But a funny story, at 2019 Nutanix.next, our customer conference, was in Ontario, Ontario, California, and Anaheim, California. And my hotel room where I was staying, I left my wallet there, but I had my credit card with me. And this was right after the release of my book, just come out, and it was right after I'd injured my shoulder snowboarding. It was in early May, and so I was in a sling, I was in pain, and it was a long walk to the convention center. And upon arriving, they had the sign, "Must have valid ID." I wasn't concerned. I walked up to one of the registration desks. I've been employed at Nutanix for over 6 years back in those days. I'm a speaker at this event, and that didn't work. So I was getting a little concerned. Now I asked to speak to a supervisor. I said, I have a credit card. I'm sorry, you must have a government-issued photo ID. Well, dreading the long walk back to my hotel, in my sling, in pain, I was inspired by one last idea. I reached in my backpack and I pulled up my brand new copy of my book, and I flipped it open to ROI Dude, and I said, "Look, that's me." And they let me in. True story.
Good stuff. Well, thank you very much for that. A nice way to end things off. Nice little comment here as well. Good stuff. I've used both SimpliVity and Nutanix, and I would say Nutanix is ahead of the curve today. So fantastic. So that brings an end to the first session. Everybody, thank you all for your participation. Awesome comments going on in the chat box as well, guys. That was an improvement even from yesterday. So fantastic. Really, really good to see. Thank you all for your participation and your engagement in the session. That's one of the hardest things with this virtual world, is to get you folks engaged. So thank you very, very much for doing so. That brings a close to the first session, as I said. So if you could just please join me in a virtual round of applause for Steve. Greatly appreciated. Obviously, if any